I tweeted about this the other day, but I remember when I first heard about Creative Mornings, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. But I worked in tech, and my job wasn't that creative, so I was just like terrified about going because I thought I'd be the only non-creative, and I'd stick out like a sore thumb. But I went anyway, and it was awesome. And the fact that I'm speaking right now is blowing my mind. So thanks for coming. So I'm Helena. I'm a commercial photographer based down the street in San Francisco. About a year ago, can you hear me, by the way? Mm-hmm. Is this okay? About a year ago, I quit my career in tech to take photos, and it was not a particularly logical or safe decision, but through a series of fortunate circumstances, I found myself working on branding and photography campaigns for a lot of my favorite companies and brands. I'm going to talk a little bit about freedom today at the request of Creative Mornings, but first I'm going to share a little bit about my story and why I'm even here on the stage. My first camera. My dad was the first person to get me into photography by introducing me to these little Walmart disposable cameras. You took 36 photos on them, and then you took your camera to Walmart, because that's what you do in North Carolina, and they give you prints back the next day. And I probably took a few thousand photos with these cameras just in elementary school and middle school alone. I documented pretty much everything. This is some of my very early work. This is a lovely still life. This is a portrait of my brother. These are my friends in the elementary school bathroom. This continued in high school, photographing everything, and then in college, still taking photos. I documented every single thing. Strangely, I never actually thought of photography as an art, perhaps because I didn't grow up in a very creative place, but it was just a compulsion. When I was 19, I became a touring photographer with bands, and I would drive circles around the country, and I would tell all of our crazy tour stories from the road on my tour blog, which still sits somewhere out there on the internet. And this is when my photos started to suck less. These are some tour photos. Despite that, I never thought I could actually be a photographer for a living because I just didn't know anyone who did that other than people in magazines. And I got a PR degree from NC State, so I figured that's what I should do. So I graduated in 2009, and I pretty much immediately moved to San Francisco with a few suitcases and exactly $40 because I thought California was magical. And I sold my car, I put a deposit on an apartment in Hayes Valley, and I got a PR job working for startups. And I thought working in tech was pretty cool, and having a salary was nice, much better than having $40. Over the next few years, I got into building brands for startups, and as many of you know, you wear a ton of hats when you're an early employee at a startup. So I worked on everything from product to biz dev, media relations, creative campaigns, all kinds of stuff. And for the majority of my time in startup land, I was completely obsessed with my career, and I lived and breathed tech and wanted to be a thought leader, and I wanted to be Forbes 30 under 30 for, I didn't even know why, but I did. And during this time, I stopped taking photos completely, and I generally was not very happy. So, fast forward to last year. It was just before New Year's of 2013, and I was sitting on this couch in my New York apartment. 2 months prior, I had given away or sold the majority of my belongings. I ditched my dream apartment in San Francisco and I went to New York to take a tech job. And it was not long before I realized that, yet again, I was pretty miserable at work. So on that couch specifically, I made a resolution to brainstorm something that made me happier than anything in the world, and to start doing that every day in 2013. And without question, that thing was taking photos. So I started taking pictures, and my goal was to take my camera everywhere with me. It was always in my purse, and I had to take photos of everything with the goal that I would have photos to edit every single night during the week. I quickly learned that I liked taking portraits, so I subsequently barked out hundreds of portraits. I was better than I remembered, which was weird, but awesome. And I started sharing my photos on the internet, and they started getting some attention. But despite this, every moment I wasn't shooting, I was still pretty unhappy. And I started getting more and more, do you guys know Grumpy in New York? I lived a block from there. So I got more and more obsessed with photography as my love for my career continued to wane. And at this point, I was pretty desperate to quit my job, but I wasn't sure what to do after that. And I didn't want to quit my job on a whim because I'd already done that too much in the past. And I was looking at other job prospects, but they weren't that exciting to me. And really all I wanted to do was take photos. But at the same time, the thought of abandoning a career that I had taken years to build was pretty terrifying. And for me, being a photographer for a living still felt totally unrealistic. Like, I just don't know how someone would do that. And so I started talking to people I looked up to for advice and expecting some magical answer. And despite the fact that there was no magical answer, they overwhelmingly told me that I should just pick the path that made me happy. And that came from people in photography, it came from people in tech. That was just the overarching advice that I got. So I ended up taking a trip to California to get away from work and just think about it. So I thought about it, and then I returned from California, and I quit my job on my first day back. That same day, I decided to move back to San Francisco to build a photography business. I had no savings, I had no plan of exactly how I was going to pull this off, but I chose not to worry about it because I knew I would make it work. And then over the next year, I ended up working on brand campaigns with Google, Nike, Samsung, Uber, Dropbox, RDO, Path, Square, all these companies that I've dreamed of working with for years. So that's my story in a nutshell. I quit my career to do what I loved, and it worked out way better than I could have ever expected. So I am here because I was asked to speak on freedom, and there is quite a bit I could talk about on the subject. Concepts like the freedom to do the work you truly love, or the freedom to grow when no one's holding you back, or the freedom to put yourself first and make decisions for yourself. Those were freedoms that I thought I suddenly gained when I quit my job, but I was quite wrong about that. That made me realize I had those freedoms the entire time, and I'm going to share them with you right now. Revelation numero uno. You cannot rely on work to make you happy. Sounds kind of like a bummer, but it's not. It's astounding how much I did not realize this until quite recently. When I arrived in San Francisco in 2009, I landed in this sea of people who lived and breathed their day jobs more than I'd ever seen in my life. What you did and what you worked on was everything, and it was important, and it defined you as a person. And it wasn't long at all before I was convinced that your job was everything, and once you were successful, you would be happy. And every time I was miserable at a job, I told myself that if I just worked as hard as possible, I would continue to move up and get better jobs, and eventually I would also be happy. So I kept moving up, and I kept getting better jobs, and I was still just as bummed. And that's when I decided to start taking photos, and that one decision obviously changed the course of my life. In some ways, I feel like I've become a bit of a poster child recently for the quit your job, do what you love mantra. And even though I am technically doing that, I've realized some very important things this year related to that. So, to start, no matter what your career, your work is still work, and it's not perfect or painless, but it's not supposed to be, and your job doesn't owe you eternal satisfaction or happiness. It owes you money, and that's why you get paid. And that sounds like a bummer, but it's gonna make sense in a second. So, look at my job, for instance. I'm taking pictures for a living, and taking pictures is literally my favorite thing to do in the entire world. And that said, when you take photos to pay your rent, not every project can be your dream project, and that's totally fine. For me, I am super grateful for client work where I can be flexible, or I can create work that has my vision, or things that just feel like my work. And I strive to do that in every project that I do, but I know that I should never rely on client work to completely satisfy me creatively. So I end up working on personal work. I devote just as much time to making sure I'm making my work that I want to make, and also making work that pays the bills. So long story short, stop expecting your paid work to be perfect. Instead, here's what I recommend. In regards to your career, whether you love it or not, keep doing the very best work that you can, but then do other things too. Take on the side projects that satisfy you creatively, eat delicious things and exercise, build friendships and relationships with awesome people, and take adventures on your day off. When you stop looking at your job to solve all of your problems, you will stop being disappointed. My second revelation: nobody is going to tell you how it's done. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received was to stop waiting for advice. I was once talking to an older and wiser friend about how I was thinking about working at a big tech company because I was really into the idea of having mentors at the time, like people that were doing things that I did, but they were doing it better and they've been doing it longer. And he said, "I see where you're coming from, but you should stop waiting for a mentor because it might never happen. Successful people didn't necessarily become so because they had mentors. They just went and did stuff." He assured me that no one actually knows what they're doing, so I shouldn't wait around for that magical moment when someone else teaches me the correct way of doing things. And that conversation has totally shaped the way that I approach work ever since. I get a lot of emails from strangers, which is awesome. And one of the biggest questions I get asked, which is seemingly basic but quite complex at the same time, is something along the lines of, "Hi Helena, I'm just emailing to ask you how do I become a successful photographer?" And so basically, all I can say is, "Dear emailer, I have no idea what to tell you because there is no answer." In my story in particular, I pretty much broke all of the rules for how to become a professional photographer. I did not work my way up in the industry. I've never assisted for anyone in my life. I have no idea how other people shoot or navigate growing their business. I have no clue. But I just jumped in and figured that I would figure it out on my own because I had no choice. And I don't know, from what I can tell, the only way to become successful, in my opinion, at anything is to define what success actually means to you, and it should be different for everyone. And then just do anything and everything that you can to make it happen, and you just can't let there be any other option. Revelation 3. No one is preventing you from making the work that you want. I often hear people complaining here and there about how they're not doing the work that they want. It could be someone wants to be an artist, but they have a full-time job. Or someone wants to shoot weddings, or someone shoots weddings for a living, but they want to shoot portraits. Or someone just isn't feeling creatively fulfilled or proud of their client work. Something along those lines. I truly think that if you really want something, you are 100% capable of doing it on your own. Perhaps you can't do it from 9 to 5 or 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays, depending on what your workday is like. But you can absolutely find time to make art or shoot portraits or fill your portfolio with personal work, even if it's an hour or two on the weekends. If I hear people legitimately complaining about how they have no time to do the work they want, I call them a big liar. Again, this touches on my first revelation, but if you want something badly enough, you should stop waiting for your boss or your clients to hand the work to you. You just have to go make it on your own, because absolutely nobody is stopping you. Now, I'm going to present to you some rules. I completely made them up, but I follow them religiously. In regards to freedom, these rules bring you pretty close to it, in my opinion. I personally define freedom as living without restraints, a life where nothing is holding you back from doing what you want. It's definitely the way that I try to live personally, and so these are the rules that I live by. First rule, just keep making. The biggest obstacle I've faced with photography or creating in general is overthinking what kind of photographer that I was supposed to be. For most of the time I was in tech, I wanted to take pictures on the side, but I was so worried about what my aesthetic should be, or whether I should shoot film, or whether I should shoot digital, or I just didn't know. I thought I had to make a decision about what my vision was before I even took a photograph. So I knew that when the time came that I was just going to take photos again, no matter what, I had to stop worrying about it and just shoot stuff. These days, despite the fact that I'm now making photos for a living, I still have the same rules I had in the beginning, which is keep my camera on me at all times and shoot enough personal work that I have non-work stuff to share every week. To this day, I have to constantly remind myself not to overthink it and just keep producing, and hopefully I'll like what comes out of it. And if I don't, it's fine. My second rule is stay grateful and stay focused. We are in an age where everyone is on the internet and everything has metrics attached to it. It's very easy to get tied up in what other people are doing and to compare yourself to others. I'm sure someone in here has experienced that. For a while, I paid quite close attention to what everyone was creating and what resonated on the interwebs, and all it did was make me really anxious about my work and worried that it wasn't good enough, or worried, I don't know. When you compare yourself to others, you just start to overly critique your own work. And for me, it's essential that I do not get distracted by this stuff, and I'm pretty militant about if I ever have a moment where an app or a website or network is making me anxious about my work and could in any way impede my ability to create, I just take a breather. So I often take quiet breaks from the internet just to make sure I'm not getting overly influenced by what's happening around me. So yeah, you can create work that gets you a bajillion likes, but I truly believe that having a clear point of view as a creator is what will create distinction and longevity for you in your career. When you are up for a bid, or if you're applying for a job, something like that, you do not want your portfolio to look like the other 10 portfolios that are in the bid next to you. I've started personally getting these bigger commercial jobs, which is a complete surprise to me, because I look at my work and for the longest time thought it wasn't as good because it doesn't look like other commercial photographers with the flashy lights and the high production, and I just thought that I was, I don't know, new to the game and maybe I'd get that good one day. But suddenly, when you're putting my work up against 5 highly produced flash photographers, brands are choosing me because my work feels more real, which is crazy. So I think there's something important in that, where if you just try very hard to make work that feels your own, you will get picked because you're different and not because you look like all the other good work that's out there. So if you're to choose, I would say play the long game and make work that's your own. And then my last rule is make the most of it. So no matter what your situation, know that there are always positives that you can glean from it and take with you. My story, for example, I would absolutely not be where I am today if it weren't for my years in tech. I learned how to build brands, I learned how to grow a business, I met a million people who helped spread the word about my work, or they became clients. Every good and bad experience that I had in tech or elsewhere just helped me build strong preferences that affect everything for me, from the kind of clients I work with to even just the people that I surround myself with. So just make the most of where you are while making moves to get wherever you want to be in terms of your work or whatever goals that you have. if you're in a situation right now that you don't love or you strongly dislike or you completely loathe, at the very least, remember that when you overcome it, you'll have a damn good story to tell. That's it.
We've got time for a few questions. If anybody wants to chip in, we've probably got like 10 minutes. Yeah, one more.
Can you talk a little bit about the first job you got as a photographer when you came back to San Francisco?
Sure. The first job I got was with Square, and I actually got approached for that job before I even quit my tech job. That was one of the big kind of pushers that got me over the finish line. I just got an email from someone who's now my friend. Her name's Michelle, and she rules. And she was like, hey, I like the work that you've been making. We're looking for someone to tell the story of vendors in the Square community that live in New York City. And I was like, this is my dream project. And so I went and got coffee with her, and I got the job. And, you know, at the time, I thought that like that one job was enough for me to quit my job, which is not true at all. But I was like, this is amazing. I can do it, and I just won't eat for a month, and this will all go to my rent, and it'll all work out. So that was my first job.
How did it go? It seems like a lot of your work went out digitally. Do you deal with print at all, or is it mainly, do you, like, when you shoot, are you thinking mostly about digital applications and that sort of thing?
It depends. Most of my personal work ends up being vertical, which is not good for the web, and all of my client work ends up being horizontal because it's good for the web. So when I do shoots for work, a big part of my job, since I used to work in tech and I do product and stuff like that, I sit down with people and I want to look at mock-ups of whatever they're building, and I want to know where the text goes, and I want to get kind of all of that out of the way, and then I can orient the client work from there. And then, yeah, for some reason, all my personal work ends up being the complete opposite, which would lend itself to print, though I am not in print yet.
You thought about any gallery shows just to share your personal work?
Maybe. All of this happened really fast, so I am still just trying to make sense of the first year. Like, it was just a whirlwind of being crazy busy with client work, which is nuts. And so for me, I'm just now getting like a little bit of a breather where I've been able to actually like articulate my story or sum up what this experience has been, or even be able to describe my work. So gallery shows would be cool. I just haven't even had time to wrap my brain around it. So yeah, one day. We'll see.
Making the transition from working full-time to client work is something that I found jarring. I know a lot of people still working full-time jobs are kind of scared about it. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Well, I thought I was the busiest I could ever be when I worked in tech. And then I got busier when I started working for myself. Though I think it depends on the kind of person you are. Like for me, I get really obsessed with work and I work all the time. And now that I'm my own boss, I will never stop. So I work constantly. If it's client work, there was a time last year where I worked 41 days in a row with no weekends, like would get up, have a breakfast meeting, shoot for 8 hours, go home, edit for 8 hours, sleep for a few hours, get up, do another breakfast meeting, do it all again for 41 days or something. That's not a smart thing to do. But I'm glad I did it. But now for me, it's like, okay, if I have some breathing room and I'm not shooting every day, there's so much more administrative work that I've completely abandoned, whether it's like, you know, making promos or setting up meetings with dream clients or just like redoing my website, stuff like that. So I don't know, I think it could be as much or as little work as you want, and I would aim for the too much and you can just cut it down from there.
Hi. Do you have any suggestions for bookkeeping, like doing taxes that mess up?
Nope. That is something I've been ignoring. Filed an extension on my taxes taxes. I have not found a great bookkeeper yet. I've been doing everything myself, but that means I'll like look at it every 2 months. So you won't die if you don't have a great bookkeeper, but yeah, I don't know that yet.
Can you give us advice about managing the networking? Like when you were starting to get work, it sounds like a lot of them came from like people who knew you and were in the world. What would your what was that experience like, and how was it, managing those relationships after it became like more professional?
Let's see. I have a tendency to want to meet everyone in the world and make friends with everyone in the world, and that's kind of how I've approached networking from the start. When I worked, part of my roles in tech was like PR, biz devy stuff, and it was my job to build relationships for the company. And despite that, I always defaulted to the idea of these people, I'm not meeting with them specifically because I have an agenda, I'm meeting with them because they work in my industry, they are interesting, I would want to be friends with them anyway, so I'm gonna go be friends with them. And that was always my goal. Like, not reach out to someone the second I needed them to write a story. It was like, reach out to them because I think they are funny on the internet and I wanna have coffee with them or something like that. And so even today, I've got clients sitting in this room that I think are friends because they're awesome. And so when I go in for a shoot, I have one goal, which is to make the best work that I can, but I have another goal, which is pretty much to make besties with them, because I think if you're gonna work together, you might as well really like each other. And I think that goes a long way when people are referring you, and not only can they say you make work that they like, but they're just fun to hang out with.
Hey, good morning. On your slides, you said make photos and verbally been saying take photos. Do you find a distinction there?
When I have time to consider wording, which is, I'm way better at doing that when I write, I like the term make photos because, I don't know, there's a lot that goes into it versus just like grabbing something. But I also think there's something interesting about not overthinking it as well. So I feel like both could apply, and there's like a tiny bit of a difference in approach depending on what the situation is.
So after a pretty awesome first year, what's your goal for the second, or do you have like long-term goals?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. Because people are like, "You had the best year ever. What are you gonna do this year?" And I've tried to not have a giant goal for this year because I feel like I've unlocked this achievement that I didn't expect to unlock yet. Like, this is like the thing that I wanted to do. So I've told myself to chill for a minute. And I think there's a lot of pressure for people to feel like they have to make this like epic work right now. And to me, the idea of peaking at 26 sounds really depressing. So I would rather just like, basically my goal is to do exactly what I'm doing, but do it better and with better people, and learn more about what I do, and just do this kind of steady incline versus like do something as crazy as what happened last year. Just because I want to be my very best when I'm like 85. So.
Any more? All right, thanks, Helena. Thanks so much for coming.